Listen, K-fam. Midnight. The one room in that mansion with no cameras, and she was already waiting inside. Her name is Danielle Monroe, 22 years old, black, brilliant, and paid to be invisible. She scrubs marble for a Korean crime family and swallows every insult with a straight spine, one firing away from nothing. Her boss is Shin Do-yeol, tall, cold, a black koi tattoo climbing the left side of his neck. His wife wears diamonds and cruelty in equal measure, and she loves reminding Danielle exactly where she stands. The wife leaves for the night. A friend's house, she says. IU. Danielle lets her copper hair down, wraps herself in a single white towel, and waits in the steam. Then the door opens. Do-yeol walks in, knuckles split and bleeding, expecting an empty house. Instead, he finds her, eyes staring him. I won't touch you while you work for me, he says. Omo. But refusal only lit the fuse. She reaches up, she touches his face, and what happened in that steam started something neither of them could ever undo. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a member and help our channel. The heel of a red-soled stiletto stopped 2 inches from Danielle Monroe's fingers, and she froze with the cloth still pressed to the marble. Stop! Jin So-yeon crouched. She did not touch the floor. She touched the air above it, one manicured nail circling the exact spot Danielle had just wiped. You call this clean? Danielle stayed on her knees. The white apron had gone gray at the hem from the morning, and the black dress clung to her back where she'd been bent over the staircase for 2 hours. She kept her eyes on the cloth. That was the trick. You kept your eyes down and you let it pass over you like weather. I finished this section an hour ago, ma'am. An hour ago. So-yeon straightened. She smoothed the ivory skirt suit over her hips, slow, like she had all the time in the world, and Danielle had none. So the smudge grew back on its own. There was no smudge. Danielle had seen the marble catch the chandelier light like still water. But she knew this game, and she knew you never won it by being right. I'll do it again. Of course you will. So-yeon's mouth curved. She reached down, not for the cloth, for Danielle's hair. 2 fingers lifted a loose copper wave off her temple, held it up to the light, and turned it like she'd found something in her soup. What even is this color? Danielle's jaw set under the skin. She held still. It's not natural. Nothing about you is natural. So-yeon let the strand drop. She wiped her fingers on the air. You come into a house like this, with hair like a struck match, and you think anyone wants to look at that over their breakfast. 20 feet up, the second-floor gallery ran the length of the foyer, and the light came down through a window 3 stories tall. Danielle had cleaned that window from a ladder on Tuesday. She'd stood up there and looked at the whole marble sea of the entrance hall and thought, for one stupid second, that it was beautiful. She wasn't thinking that now. Stand up. Danielle rose. She was taller than So-yeon in flats, than So-yeon was in 4 inches of heel, and she watched the woman's eyes register that and hate it. So-yeon stepped in close, perfume like cold metal. That uniform is a size too small. It's the one I was given. Then you've eaten your way out of it. So-yeon's gaze went down and up, slow, cataloging. The full bust, the waist, the dress pinched, the hips the fabric had to stretch across. It's obscene. My husband's associates walk through this door, investors, men who matter, and the first thing they see is you, spilling out of a maid's dress like some. She searched for it, found it, savored it, like something off a corner. The word landed. Danielle felt it land. She kept her breathing even and her hands flat against her thighs, and inside her chest something small and old folded itself smaller. I'll ask the housekeeper for a larger size. You'll ask nothing. You'll fit into what you have. Soyeon turned away, then turned back, because she wasn't finished, and Danielle had been foolish to hope she was. And the stairs, all of them, again, from the top. I want to see my face in them when I come down for lunch, and if I don't, she let it hang. If I don't, you're gone. That was the sentence. Soyeon never said the last part. She didn't have to. It lived in the house like a smell. Yes, ma'am. Soyeon's heels struck the marble in a straight, hard line toward the east wing, each step a little detonation, and Danielle stood in the wide, silent hall and let her get all the way gone before she moved. Then she picked up the bucket. The water had gone lukewarm and gray. She carried it to the utility sink behind the coat gallery and poured it out and filled it fresh, and while it ran, she put both hands on the cold rim of the sink and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way her mother used to before a double shift. You don't cry in the house. You never cry in the house. The house has ears, the house has eyes, and every tear is a thing they can use. She had done the math 100 times, and it came out the same every time. $411. That was what was in the account. Rent on the room in Koreatown was $650, due in 19 days. This job paid it, and paid it barely. And this job could end in a single sentence from a woman who circled clean marble with her fingernail for sport. One firing from nothing. That was the whole truth of her life, and she carried it up the staircase with a fresh bucket and a clean cloth and started again from the top step. There was no cushion behind her, no family with a spare room, no savings, no number to call. Her mother had died on her feet the way poor women die, and the man who was her father had been a rumor even to her mother. The medallion and the 2 years of a certificate she couldn't finish, that was the whole inheritance. When people said pick yourself up, she wanted to ask them what they thought she'd been doing every single morning since she was 17. She picked herself up. That was the only skill the world had ever let her practice for free. She worked the way she'd been taught in the hospitality program before the money ran out and the certificate never came. Top down, edge to center. Never let a drip travel back onto finished stone. 2 years of that program. She could plan the turn-down service for a 40-room floor. She could route a laundry schedule so nothing crossed contaminated. She could read an occupancy sheet like sheet music. And here she was on her knees on a rich woman's stairs because a certificate you couldn't afford to finish was worth exactly nothing, and a black girl with no capital and no papers finished was worth a maid's dress a size too small. She didn't let herself sit in it. She wiped. The medallion at her throat swung forward as she leaned. Small pearls, a gold coin pendant, warm from her skin, her grandmother's. The one thing in the world that was hers and had always been hers. Through the foster placements, through the eviction, through everything. She caught it in one hand and tucked it back inside her collar so it wouldn't tap the stone, and she kept going. She was on the 9th step when she heard the second set of heels. Different rhythm, slower. Soyeon coming back through, on her way to the car, and Danielle didn't look up, but she felt the woman stop at the base of the stairs and look up the length of them at her. You missed one. Danielle looked. There was nothing. Right there. By your knee. Danielle wiped by her knee. The marble was already glass. Better. Soyeon's voice had gone almost gentle, and that was worse than the shouting, because gentle meant she'd gotten what she wanted, which was to watch. You know, some girls would be grateful. A roof, meals, work indoors, a pause. But gratitude's not in the blood with your kind, is it? The bucket handle bit into Danielle's palm. She had it in a grip that would leave a line for an hour. I'm grateful for the work, ma'am. Soyeon stopped, turned, came back 3 steps, and now there was something worse in her face than boredom. Interest. Say it again. Danielle's throat worked. I'm grateful for the work. No, not like that. Like you mean it. Soyeon tilted her head. The oversized sunglasses pushed up into her blonde hair, caught the chandelier, and threw a hard little coin of light across Danielle's chin. Get down and say it. The hall went very quiet. Somewhere off the kitchen, a tap dripped. Danielle stood with the bucket at the end of her arm and 42 clean steps at her back, and she looked at this woman who had never in her life poured out her own gray water, and every muscle in her held the line between what she was and what she needed. She got down, one knee on the cold marble at the base of her own clean stairs. I'm grateful for the work, ma'am. Soyeon looked at her a long moment. Then she smiled, small and satisfied. The smile of someone who has confirmed a thing she suspected about the order of the world. Good girl! And she turned, and her heels went toward the door. Danielle stayed down until she heard the great door open, because standing up too soon would be its own confession. When she rose, her knee had gone numb against the stone, and she stood there flexing it, feeling the blood come back, feeling the whole cost of $411 in one aching joint. Have it perfect by 2, Soyeon called, without turning, and the door closed on the words. The great door opened and closed, a car door outside, the low, expensive purr of an engine pulling out through the gate. And then the house exhaled, and Danielle sat back on her heels on the 9th step and looked at her own hands and let them shake, just for a second, just until the shaking stopped on its own. She did not cry. She wanted to. She didn't. By noon she had done all 42 steps twice, and the banister once, and she could, in fact, see her own face in the marble, a dark oval, copper waves loose around it, eyes that gave nothing away. She looked at herself lying there in the stone, like a reflection in a black lake, and then she stood up and moved on, because there was the morning room and the orchid table and the long hall of photographs where Shin Do-yeol and Jin So-yeon smiled out of silver frames at galas Danielle would never see the inside of. She dusted the frames. In every one, So-yeon's hand rested on her husband's arm, and in every one, the husband's smile stopped at his mouth. Danielle had noticed that on her first week, the man in the photographs was somewhere behind his own face, watching from a long way back, and none of the cameras had ever reached him. She knew him a little, not the way the frames knew him, the other way. The way you know a man at 1 a.m, when the house is asleep and the cameras in the halls are just red dots, and you are the only 2 people awake in 40,000 square feet. He kept late hours. He came home when honest people were long in bed, and sometimes he came into the kitchen where she was doing the last of the glassware, and he didn't send her away. That was the thing. He never sent her away. He'd take off his jacket and sit at the staff table. The staff table, not the marble island, the plain wood one where the help ate. And he'd loosen the collar and pour himself something and say nothing for a while. And she'd keep drying glasses, and it wasn't uncomfortable. That was the strange part. It should have been. It wasn't. The first time he'd spoken to her like a person, she'd nearly dropped a plate. You went to school for this? He'd nodded at the way she'd stacked the service. Blades in, everything squared. Hotels. 2 years. I didn't finish. Why not? And she'd told him the truth, which she never told anyone, because it was 1 a.m, and he'd asked like the answer mattered. Money ran out. He'd nodded, slow, like that was an answer he understood in his bones, and he hadn't said anything stupid about hard work or bootstraps. He'd just looked at his glass and said, "It's a good stack," and that was all. But she'd carried it around for a week like a coin in her pocket. There'd been another night. She'd been wiping the Long Island and hadn't heard him come in, and when she looked up, he was in the doorway, with his jacket over one shoulder, and the koi tattoo dark on his neck above the open collar, and he was watching her hum. She hadn't known she'd been humming. She'd stopped, mortified, hands going still on the cloth. "Keep going," he'd said. "I didn't know I was—" "I know you didn't." He'd crossed to the staff table and set the jacket down and lowered himself into the chair like a man setting down something heavy that wasn't the jacket. "That's why keep going." She hadn't kept going. She couldn't, not with him listening. But she'd understood what he meant, and it had frightened her a little, how much she'd understood it. He wanted the sound of a person doing an ordinary thing badly and freely in a house where everything else was staged. He wanted proof the building held one honest breath, and she was it. The help. The girl in the too small dress. In 40,000 square feet of arranged marble, the boss came home at midnight to hear the maid hum, and neither of them ever said a word about it in the daylight. Once he'd come in with his right hand wrapped in a dish towel gone through pink, and she'd moved toward him without thinking. A nurse's reflex, a person's reflex, and he'd lifted the hand a fraction, not to accept it, to stop it. "Don't," he'd said, not unkind. "You don't want to be the one who touched it." She'd stepped back. She'd understood that too. There were things in this house you didn't want your fingerprints on, and a man's split knuckles at midnight were one of them, and he'd been protecting her from her own kindness. She'd gone back to the glasses, and he'd wrapped the hand himself, one-handed, teeth on the corner of the towel, and when he left he'd said good night, in a voice that used her like a name he didn't know. She wasn't a fool. She knew what the house was. She knew what he was, knew it in the way the staff went quiet when certain cars came through the gate, knew it in the nights he came back with his knuckles split and wrapped them himself at the kitchen sink, and never asked for help and never explained. Shin Do-yeol did not run import-export the way the tax filings said he did. Everyone in the house knew, and no one in the house said. You worked for the Shin family, and you learned which questions to swallow. But at 1 a.m, at the staff table, he wasn't the man the whole house held its breath around. He was just tired, and he saw her. In a house where the lady of it circled clean floors to find sin in them, the man of it looked at Danielle Monroe and saw a person who'd stacked plates well, and God help her, she'd started living for it. The after-midnight hours, the small human minutes at the plain wood table, she hoarded them like the $400, and they were worth about as much, and she knew it, and she couldn't stop. She was polishing the last frame when the housekeeper, Mrs. O, found her. She called from the car. Mrs. O's face was doing the careful nothing it always did when passing down Soyeon's orders. Korean accented English, low, the stairs again before 2, and, a small hesitation, an apology the woman would never say out loud. She wants your uniform changed. Something looser, less. Mrs. O gestured vaguely at all of Danielle. You understand. I understand. There isn't a looser one. Not in your... Mrs. O's eyes flicked, embarrassed, over the shape of her. I'll order it. It takes a week. Then I'll wear this for a week. Mrs. O nodded, relieved to be let off. She turned to go, then stopped, and her voice dropped even lower. Don't give her a reason. This week especially, the mistress is... She chose the word, watched. Something's happening in the house. Money people, in and out. She's on edge. When she's on edge, she finds someone to break. Danielle set the last frame straight on the wall. I know. You're a smart girl. It wasn't quite kindness. It was warning, wearing kindness. Smart girls don't stay too long in a house like this. Get what you need, then go. Get what you need, then go. Everyone said it. No one ever managed it. The house had a way of closing around a person, of making the next paycheck the only real thing, of shrinking the whole horizon down to 19 days and $650, and you told yourself you'd leave the second you had a cushion, and the cushion never came. Mrs. O left. Danielle went back to the stairs. She was halfway up, on her knees again, when the light through the tall window changed. A cloud, a shift, and for a moment the whole foyer went dim and cathedral quiet, and she stopped with the cloth in her hand and looked up at the height of the ceiling and the wide, cold, beautiful emptiness of a house that would never once be hers. And she thought about her grandmother, and she touched the medallion through her collar. Then she heard the front gate intercom buzz, and a man's voice on the staff line, and Mrs. O's hurried steps, and the particular tension that came into the house when serious men arrived, the navy-suited one, with the silver tie and the leather folder under his arm, the one the whole staff called Nothing, because he'd never given anyone his name, and his eyes went over you like you were furniture. Quack, the finance man. He came on the days money moved. Danielle pressed herself smaller against the banister as the heavy front door opened below, and the man crossed the marble she'd just cleaned, leaving nothing, saying nothing, his loafers silent, the folder tight under his arm. He didn't look up. Men like him never looked up. The help was scenery. He crossed the whole foyer and went down the east hall toward Doyle's study, and behind him, 2 more men in dark suits, and Danielle stayed very still on the 9th step until every one of them was gone. Then the study door closed, and she heard, faintly before it sealed, one sentence in Doyle's low, flat voice. Not while my wife is in the house. And then nothing, the thick door swallowing the rest. She sat back on her heels. Not while my wife is in the house. She turned it over. It could mean anything. It could mean nothing. But the house taught you that sentences carried weight, that the ones you weren't meant to hear were the true ones, and this one had a shape to it she didn't like and couldn't name. She finished the stairs. Done by the deadline, glass and glass and glass, 42 dark mirrors climbing to the gallery, and when So-yeon came home she walked down them without looking, and said nothing at all, which from her was the closest thing to defeat. Danielle watched her go. Then she gathered the bucket and the cloths and went back to the utility sink to pour out the gray water one more time, and she stood there with her hands on the cold rim, and she made herself a promise she'd made before and would make again. 19 days. Get the rent covered, then start looking for the door. She didn't know yet that in 3 days, So-yeon would leave for her friend's house across the city, and the cameras in the halls would keep blinking their red eyes at everything except the one room that had none, and a man with split knuckles would come home at midnight to a house he thought was empty. She poured out the water and watched it spiral down and go. So-yeon came down the stairs at 8. With an overnight bag she let one of the men carry to the car. She wore the cream skirt suit, the red-soled heels striking the marble in that hard, clean rhythm, and she didn't say goodbye to the house. She said one thing on her way through the foyer. Nobody waits up. Then the door, then the engine, then 2 red taillights swallowed by the long dark of the drive. Danielle stood at the top of the freshly done stairs and listened to the gate roll shut. She counted to 200. That was the number she'd made up for herself. A number long enough that a car couldn't turn around and come back for a forgotten thing. At 200, the house was still. Mrs. O had gone to her room off the kitchen. The men were outside, past the second gate, in the small lit box where they smoked and watched screens. The cameras in the halls kept their small red hearts beating, one after another, blinking down every corridor she knew by heart. She'd learned the house the way you learn a body you have to work on. Where it saw, where it didn't, which floorboard in the upper gallery gave a soft complaint under a heel, and which stayed silent. She knew the schedule of the men outside better than they did. The shift change at 11, the 15 minutes near midnight, when both of them looked at the same phone and the drive went unwatched. She had never once used any of it. She'd just collected it, the way a woman with $400 collects anything free, in case a day came when knowing was the only thing she owned. Tonight, the knowing had a use. Every corridor but one. She'd walked past that door 100 times with a rag in her hand. The east wing had a spa off the pool deck, and in the spa was a cedar room with a heater and a low bench and a bucket of stones, and above that door there was nothing. No dome, no red eye, no wire. She'd checked it on her third day, the way you check a lock you don't trust, running her fingers along the frame, tilting her head to catch a reflection that never came. Nothing watched that room. In a house that watched everything, that was the only privacy money had forgotten to buy. She went up the service stairs to the small bathroom off her quarters and turned the water hot. The uniform came off in the order it always came off. Collar, apron, dress, the sheer black tights peeling down like a second skin she was glad to be rid of. She stood under the water and let it take the day off her shoulders. Soyeon's nail on the marble, Soyeon's voice on her hair. Good girl. The water ran over her scalp and she scrubbed until the words went quiet, until she was just a body under heat, breathing, 22, alive, worth something to nobody, with power and everything to herself. She didn't put the uniform back on. She'd thought about this all day, the way you think about stepping off a high thing before you do it. She took a single white towel from the shelf, wrapped it tight above the chest, tucked the corner. Her hair came down out of its knot in loose copper waves, still damp, catching the low light. The pearl necklace with the gold medallion stayed where it always stayed, warm against her skin. She looked at herself in the fogged mirror and wiped one clean circle with her palm, and met her own eyes and did not look away. Then she walked down through the sleeping house to the one room that couldn't tell on her. The cedar was warm when she opened it. She ladled water on the stones, and the heat bloomed up thick and white and folded around her. She sat on the low bench with her back to the wall and her knees drawn up, and she waited. Her heart was going hard. She let it. She'd spent 2 years being told to be smaller, smaller in the uniform, smaller in the voice, smaller in the wanting, and for one night she wanted to take up exactly as much room as she was. The heat wrapped her. Sweat came up on her collarbones and ran a slow line under the medallion. She thought about walking out even now, going up, putting the tights back on, being sensible. Sensible had kept her at $400. Sensible had let a woman rub an invented stain and make her say thank you. She stayed on the bench. She didn't fully know what she was waiting for. That was the honest part. She knew the shape of it. A man came home most nights near midnight. A man who sat at the staff table instead of the marble island. A man who'd stopped her hand once so she wouldn't be the one who touched the blood. She wasn't waiting for a plan. She was waiting to be, for 1 hour, in the same room as the only person in this house who'd ever looked at her and seen a person. The heat pressed. Time went soft. Somewhere past the walls, a clock she couldn't hear turned over into a new day. Tires on gravel. She heard the gate first, that low mechanical groan, then the car, then the front door far away and heavy. Footsteps crossed the marble she'd cleaned twice. They were slower than usual, dragging at the heel, the walk of a man carrying something in his body. They stopped in the foyer. She pictured him standing there, taking in the dark, the empty island, the silence where a wife should have been leaving a light on to prove she'd stayed. Soyeon, his voice, once, not loud. No answer came, because there was no one to answer. The footsteps moved through the ground floor, a door, another. He was checking the house, the way a man checks a house that has taught him not to trust quiet. The steps came closer, into the east wing, past the pool. She heard him stop outside the spa. She heard him breathe. The cedar door opened. Shin Do-yeol stood in the frame with the hall dark behind him and the steam rolling out past his shoulders. He'd stripped down to a white towel at the waist, the way a man does who's come home wrecked and wants heat on his spine before he can think. The koi ran up the left of his neck and vanished under nothing now, all of it bare. His knuckles were split again, dark and swollen, one of them still weeping a thin line he hadn't cleaned. He saw her and went completely still. Whatever the night had done to him was written on him plain. There was a red mark high on one cheekbone that would be a bruise by morning. His breath came a little short, like something on the left side of his ribs had taken a boot. He'd carried all of that home through his own front door, expecting an empty bed and a dark house and 1 hour of heat where nobody needed anything from him. He had not expected her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The steam turned between them. She watched him take her in. The towel, the loose hair, the bare shoulders, the necklace. And she watched the exact second he understood that she hadn't wandered here by accident, that the empty house and the one blind room and the woman waiting in it were a sentence she had written on purpose. Something crossed his face and he shut it down fast. His jaw set. His eyes went to the door behind him, then to the ceiling corner where a camera would be in any other room, then back to her when he remembered there wasn't one. "You should be upstairs." His voice came low and rough. "There's no one to send me up." He didn't come in. He stayed in the frame with one hand on the jamb, and his split knuckles pressed white against the wood. "Get dressed. Go to your room." A pause, and something under the words that cost him. "Before I forget how to say that." She stood up off the bench. The towel held. She crossed the small, warm room until there was a foot of steam between them, and no more, and she looked up at him, and she was not afraid, and he could see she was not afraid, and that undid something in his eyes. "You look at me every night," she said, quiet, steady. "At that table, you ask me about school. You told me to keep singing. That's different." "How?" He didn't have it fast enough. His throat moved. "Because at that table, there are things I can't do." His eyes dropped to her mouth and came back up, and the discipline in him fought and held. "I don't touch what works for me. I made that rule a long time ago, and I've never once—" He stopped. His hand came off the jamb and hung there, not reaching, refusing to reach. "You work in my house, and you take my wife's orders. If I put a hand on you, you're not free to say no. You understand? That's not a thing I get to have." "That's your rule," she said, "not mine." His breathing changed. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said. "I don't need the job. I've got 19 days of rent and no family and a necklace, and I'll walk out that gate the day it stops being mine to choose. So don't stand there telling me what I'm free to want." Her chin lifted. "I came down here. Nobody sent me. Nobody's watching. For once in this house, nobody is watching." She let that land. "So the only rule in this room is the one I make." He looked at her for a long, long moment. The heat rolled. His hand, the wrecked one, opened and closed at his side. "You don't know what I am," he said, and it was almost gentle, almost a warning meant to save her. "You've heard the knuckles come home. You've cleaned up after the men who wait on that stack of money in my study. You don't know the half of it. Women who get close to me don't stay clean. I've been on my knees on your marble," she said. "I know exactly how clean this house is." That hit him somewhere he didn't guard. He'd expected her to flinch at the warning. Every soft thing that ever got near him flinched at the warning. It was how he cleared them out before they cost him anything. She didn't flinch. She named the dirt back to him and stood in her towel and waited. "You keep telling me the danger," she went on, quieter. "Like I don't wash it off your hands. Like I don't see the men who wait on that money in your study. You think I stayed in this house 2 years and learned nothing." She held his eyes. "I know what you are better than the woman who married you. And I came down here anyway." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, something worse and more human than a smile. He looked at her like a man looking at the one door in a long hallway he'd promised himself he'd never open. "Send me away then," she said, softer now. "Say it once more and mean it, and I'll go up and put the uniform back on, and we'll never speak of it, and I'll pour Soyeon's coffee tomorrow, like tonight never happened." He didn't say it. That was the whole answer. He stood in the frame with the door open, and the way out clear behind him, and he didn't say it, and he didn't step back. She lifted her hand. She did it slowly, the way you move around something wild you don't want to spook, and she laid her palm flat against the side of his face, against the sharp jaw, the day's dark stubble, the heat of him under all that stillness. He shut his eyes when she touched him, a man who'd taken hits that split bone in his hands, and it was a maid's palm on his cheek that made his breath catch, and his whole frame go tight, like a wire pulled to its last inch. Danielle. Just her name. He'd never once said it before tonight. It came out of him like it had been sitting behind his teeth for months. "I know," she said. She rose up and closed the last of the space and kissed him. For a second he held himself apart. The discipline, the rule, the years of naught. His hands fisted at his sides, and his mouth still under hers, refusing. She felt the war in him. She didn't push. She just stayed, her palm on his face, her mouth soft against his, letting him choose. He chose. The breath went out of him all at once, and his hand came up, the split one, the ruined one, and buried itself in the wet copper of her hair, and he kissed her back like a man who'd been thirsty a very long time and had finally stopped pretending he wasn't. The other arm came around her waist and pulled her in off her heels. The towel between them, the steam, the heat of the stones, the whole silent house above them that heard nothing and saw nothing and could not tell. She felt his knuckles, raw and swollen, curve gentle against her scalp, like the only careful thing those hands knew how to do. When her fingers found the split one and pressed, feather light, he hissed, and she felt him start to pull the hand away out of old habit. "Don't be the one who touches it," and she held it there against her hair and wouldn't let him take it back. "You don't have to keep them off me," she said against his mouth. "I'm not the one you have to protect from your hands." His breath broke rough against her cheek. Whatever he'd meant to say, he lost it. When they broke, it was only an inch, only enough to breathe. His forehead came down against hers, his eyes stayed shut, his hand stayed in her hair, like he'd forget how to let go if he thought about it. "This can't leave this room," he said against her mouth, low, wrecked. "You understand what happens if it does. To you, not to me, to you." "Then it stays in this room," she said. "I mean it. Nobody, not Mrs. O, not a look across the kitchen." His thumb moved once, slow, along the line of her jaw. "This house eats things like this alive." "I know how to keep a thing quiet," she said. "I've been quiet my whole life. This is different." His voice dropped lower, and the calm in it now had teeth. "Soyeon doesn't lose. Not gracefully, not ever. If she smells this, she won't fire you. She'll ruin you first, and fire you after. So there's nowhere left to land. You've got 19 days of rent. She's got lawyers who bill your 19 days by the hour." His thumb moved along her jaw, slow, like he was memorizing it against a day he'd have to give it up. "I'm not warning you off. God help me. I'm past that. I just need you walking into this with your eyes open." "They're open." She didn't blink. "They've been open since the first night you sat at that table instead of the island." His breath left him in something that wasn't quite a laugh. He pulled back just enough to look at her, really look. The calm hooded eyes gone open and dark and unguarded in a way she'd bet the men outside had never once seen. He looked at her like the ground had shifted under a thing he thought was nailed down forever. "You waited," he said. Not a question. working it out. The empty house, this room. His eyes went to the door, the ceiling, the blind corner, the one room with no eyes. Something moved behind his face, half wonder, half warning. You planned this. I picked the only place we'd be nobody's business but our own. He was quiet a moment. Then his hand came off her hair and pressed flat and warm between her shoulder blades, keeping her close, and he let his head drop so his mouth was at her temple, and he breathed her in, and the last of the fight went out of his shoulders. There's no going back from this, he said. I want you to know that before he stopped, swallowed. I don't do this and then pretend at that table tomorrow that I didn't. That's not in me. So if you want out, it's now, the door's right there. It's now, she said, and I'm not going for the door. She reached past him and pushed the cedar door shut. The latch caught with a small, clean sound, and the steam sealed in, and the two of them stood in the one warm, blind room in a house full of red eyes, and above them, the cameras kept blinking down empty halls at nothing at all, faithful and stupid, recording a marble staircase where no one stood, a kitchen where no one moved, a life that looked from every angle exactly like it always had. Down in the cedar, a man who'd made one rule in 38 years broke it with both hands, and a woman with $400 and a dead grandmother's medallion held his face like it was hers to hold, and neither of them said a word about tomorrow. His mouth found hers again, and this time there was no war in it. Outside the second gate, the men watched their screens and saw a quiet house. Somewhere across the city, Soyeon was walking into a room that was not her friend's, setting down a bag, being met by a man in rimless glasses who had been waiting for her, but that was a thread that hadn't pulled taut yet, and neither of them in the cedar knew the first thing about it. What they knew was heat and hands and a door that had finally shut. And when Doyeol pulled back one more time, breathing hard, and looked at her in the low red glow of the stones, he said the thing that would bind them tighter than any contract in his study. From now on, he said, midnight, this room, just this. She held his gaze. The medallion rose and fell at the base of her throat. Just this, she said. The stones ticked as they cooled. The house slept its watch, lying sleep above them, and in the one place it couldn't see, something began that neither of them could afford, and neither of them, now, could stop. She had come down those stairs with nothing but a towel and a nerve she'd been saving for 2 years. She would go back up them the same way, quiet, careful, a maid again by 6. But something had changed hands tonight that no camera caught and no ledger recorded, and both of them knew it, and both of them were already lying to the whole world about it by the simple act of saying nothing. Midnight. This room. Just this. It was the best promise either of them had. It was also the first thread of the rope that would, in time, be used to hang them both. The pantry smelled of dried anchovies and cardamom, and Danielle had learned to find the light switch without looking. She had also learned not to turn it on. 3 nights into the promise, she stood between the shelving with a jar of pickled radish in her hand she did not need, because the jar was the reason if anyone asked, and the reason was never the reason. Doyeol came in behind her the way he came into every room now. Quiet, deliberate, checking the corners first. He shut the door with 2 fingers so the latch wouldn't click. In the dark, he found her by the shoulder, then the jaw, then her mouth. The kiss was short. It had to be. The pantry was the only interior door in the house, with no camera on it, besides the cedar room, and even here, the window on the service hall let a slice of light in under the sill. 11 minutes, he said against her hair. His voice was low and rough from a night of whatever the night had been. The shift changes soon. I know the shifts better than you do. He almost smiled. She felt it more than saw it. the small shift in the muscle of his cheek under her palm. He caught her hand and turned it, pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist where the pulse ran fast, and she let him, and neither of them said the thing that was true, which was that 11 minutes had started to feel like the only real minutes of the day. She reached for his other hand. He tried to pull it back on reflex, the same reflex from the first night, the same one she'd broken in the sauna. The knuckles were worse tonight. 2 of them split fresh, a third crusted from days before and reopened. She held his hand up to the thread of light under the door and looked. "You went back to whoever did this last week," she said. "I finished something. You reopened it. That's what finishing looks like sometimes." She didn't answer that. She'd stopped asking what he did after the first 2 nights, because the answer was always a wall dressed up as a sentence, and she wasn't a fool, and she'd known what he was since before she ever knocked water off those pedstones. But she could do this. She could hold the broken part of him in the dark of a pantry and make it hers to fix. She pulled a clean linen from the shelf, the ones Mrs. O counted every Sunday, and wrapped his knuckles the way a hotel taught you to wrap anything, snug, folded, tucked so it held without a knot showing. 2 years of a program she never finished, and here it was, worth something at last, in the dark, on the hands of a man the whole city was afraid of. "You keep taking those," he said, watching her count the linens back in her head. "Mrs. O counts on Sunday. I'll have it washed and folded before then." "You think of everything." "I've had to." The latch, footsteps in the service hall. She went still. He went stiller. They stood a breath apart in the anchovy dark, while one of the men walked the length of the corridor, paused. A lighter clicking, a slow exhale, and moved on. When the steps faded, she let the air out of her chest. Duyol was already at the door, one hand flat on the wood, listening the animal way he listened to everything. "Go up the back," he said. "I'll take the front. Count to whatever number you count to." 200. He looked at her a second longer than the 11 minutes could afford. Then he was gone, and she counted, and the pickled radish went back on the shelf where it had never needed to leave. She made it up the back stairs with the count in her chest and the taste of him still on her mouth, and she lay in the narrow staff bed, doing the thing she'd trained herself never to do, which was want something she couldn't keep. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a country she'd never see. She stared at it and let herself have exactly 1 minute of it. Then she put it away, the way she'd put away the mother and the hotel and every other thing that cost more than she had, and she slept the thin sleep of a woman who counts even in her dreams. The next night, he brought her something. He almost never brought things. Objects left traces, and a man like him lived by leaving none. But the 4th night, he pressed a small tin into her palm in the pantry dark. "Salve, the kind that cost more than her week. For your hands," he said. "You take the linen off me and put it on your own." He'd noticed. The bleach cracked her knuckles every winter, and she'd stopped seeing it as anything but the price of the work. He'd seen it in the low light of a chipped table and gone and found the most expensive quiet thing a man could give a woman without leaving a trace, and she stood in the dark holding a tin of salve and had to work very hard not to let it mean what it meant. 11 minutes, she said, because it was safer than thank you. 10 now. But he took her cracked hand first and rubbed the salve into it himself, slow, thumb working the split skin over each knuckle, and she let him, and the anchovies and cardamom, and the man's careful thumb made a whole world the size of a pantry. The 3 a.m. coffee started by accident and became a rule the way everything between them became a rule, quietly, without either of them proposing it. He came in from the garage side one night with a cut over his eyebrow and found her already at the staff table with 2 cups poured, because she'd heard the gate at 10 to 3 and she knew his tires now, the way she knew the tables, and the turning of the shifts. He sat, not at the marble island, at the staff table, on the bench with the chip in the corner, the same place he'd sat those first strange months when she thought he was only being decent to the help. She understood now it had never been only decent. "You poured too," he said. "I heard the gate." He wrapped both hands around the cup. The linen from the pantry was still on his knuckles, gone gray now. She reached over without asking and started unwinding it, and he let her. And this was the thing that undid her more than the kissing, that a man who flinched from every touch in every room of his life would sit at a chipped table and hold his hands out to be unwrapped. The cut over his eyebrow had bled into his lashes and dried there. She wet the corner of a cloth and cleaned it, tilting his face to the low light over the range. He watched her the whole time, not the way a man watches a woman he wants, though there was that too. The way a man watches a door he's afraid to hope is unlocked. "You should have been a nurse," he said. "I wanted to run a hotel." She dabbed the last of it. "Front of house, the part where people arrive tired and afraid, and you make them feel like the place was waiting just for them. I was good at the arriving part. I never got to the running part." "Why not?" "Money, same as everything." She folded the cloth. "You don't get to finish things when you're counting days to rent." He was quiet. Then, low, "How many days now?" She knew exactly. She always knew exactly. 11. He set the cup down. Something moved across his face and was gone before she could name it. "You'll be covered," he said. "I'm not asking you to cover me. I know you're not. That's why you'll be covered." She didn't argue, because arguing meant staying too long, and the shift men would be up soon, and the whole architecture of this thing they were building was made of leaving on time. She rinsed both cups. He watched her do it. When she turned around, he was already standing by the garage door, and he said her name once, the way he'd started saying it, like it cost him something and he'd decided to spend it anyway. "Danielle. Go to bed, Duyol. Midnight," he said. "Tomorrow. The room. I'll be there." The cedar room was where the talking happened. The pantry was for the 11 stolen minutes, the coffee for the small hours when the house was blind. But the sauna? The sauna was the only place with a door that locked and no eye on the wall. And there they had something the rest of the house never gave either of them, which was time that didn't have to be counted. She'd wait for him on the low bench, hair down, the towel loose, the medallion cool against her collarbone. He'd come in after his rounds of the terrain and shed the suit jacket, the vest, roll the crisp white sleeves to the elbow. He never took more off than that, unless the night had left marks he couldn't hide. And on those nights, she saw the koi run up under his jaw, and the bruises the koi couldn't cover, and she stopped asking about those too. "Tell me a real thing," she said one night, water hissing on the stones. "Everybody in this house lies with their whole face. Tell me one real thing." He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't. Then, "I was 9 when my father put me in a car and told me to watch a man. Just watch. Tell him if the man moved." He turned the steel watch on his wrist, around and around. "The man didn't move. I passed. That was the first thing I ever passed." He looked at her. "You want a real thing. That's the realest one I have. I've been passing tests like that since I was 9, and I never once got to want the thing I wanted." "What do you want?" He didn't say it. He put his bandaged hand over hers on the bench and left it there, and in that house, that was the whole sentence. Another night he came in later than late, near 2, with a stillness on him she hadn't seen before, and he sat on the low bench and put his elbows on his knees and stared at the stones for a long while before he spoke. "Someone I've known 30 years lied to me tonight," he said. I knew he was lying. I let him think I believed it. He turned the watch. "That's the part nobody tells you. The lying's easy. Watching someone lie to your face while you decide what to do about it. That's the work. Who was it? Doesn't matter. It mattered. She heard it in the flatness. But she'd learned the shape of his walls, and she didn't push against this one. She wet a cloth instead, and cleaned the split over his eyebrow that had opened again, and he let her tilt his face to the light, and after a while the stillness went out of him a little. "You don't ask enough questions," he said. "I ask the ones I want answered." She pressed the cloth to the cut. "The rest I already know, or I'm better off not knowing. I learned that in this house before I ever learned your name." He caught her wrist, gently, the guarded man being ungentle only in how firmly he wanted her to hear it. "Keep it that way," he said. "The not knowing. It's the only thing keeping you clean in here." She heard the thing under it, the thing he wouldn't say plain. That whatever moved through this house at 3 in the morning was the kind of thing that stained everyone it touched, and he was trying, in the only way he had, to keep the stain off her. She filed that too. She was filing a great many things lately. They played a game with the koi. She'd asked about it the second night, tracing the tail where it vanished under his collar, and he'd told her a lie. A decorative lie, a tattoo parlor lie, about balance and perseverance. The third night she'd said, "Now the real one," and he'd told her his brother had the same one, mirror side, right of the neck, and his brother was 3 years dead, and the fish were supposed to be swimming toward each other, and now one of them swam toward nothing. He never said the brother's name. She never asked for it. She learned him the way you learn a house in the dark. By touch, by patience, by mapping the places that ranged when you stepped wrong. And he learned her. He knew about the grandmother now, and the medallion, and the mother who died owing 3 months of rent that a 16-year-old had paid off, working 2 jobs and finishing no school. He knew she counted rooms and shifts and cameras, because counting was how she'd survived every place that ever tried to make her small. He knew she wasn't staying for him. He seemed to need that to be true, that she was here because she chose the room and not because a rich man had reached down. "When the days run out," he said once, "you'll go if you want to go. I'll go if I want to go, even if I ask you to stay, especially then." He nodded like she'd passed something. And there it was, the shape of the thing that bound them, clearer every night. It wasn't the wanting, though God knew the wanting was there, thick as the steam. It was that each of them held a secret that could end the other. She could walk out the gate and say one true sentence to the right reporter and burn the house down. He could lift one finger and she'd never work in this city again, never make rent, never finish anything. 2 people, each with a hand at the other's throat, choosing every single midnight not to squeeze. That was the engine. That was the whole terrible engine of it. Trust built out of mutual ruin, in a house with cameras in every hall but one. Mrs. O knew. Not the specifics. Danielle would have staked the medallion that the specifics were locked in the cedar room where they belonged. But the governess had eyes older than the house, and she'd started leaving things. A second cup set out before Danielle got to the staff kitchen. The Sunday linen count come up 1 short and no word said about it. A folded note once, tucked in the apron Danielle pulled from the press. 3 words in a careful hand. "Careful with the master." Not a threat, a warning from a woman who'd watched this family eat people. Danielle burned the note in the range flame and said nothing. And the next Sunday, Mrs. O looked at her across the counting table and said only, "You look less tired," which from Mrs. O was a whole paragraph, and neither of them touched what lived under it. "You've been here 2 years," Mrs. O said, stacking the folded towels into their tower. "I've watched 3 girls come and go before you. You know what they had in common." She didn't wait for an answer. They thought the house was a ladder. It's not a ladder, it's a mouth. She squared the last towel and set it on top. The ones who leave whole are the ones who never forget it's a mouth. Then she picked up her count sheet and went. And Danielle stood with the smell of range fire and clean linen, and understood she'd just been handed the closest thing to love the old woman had to give. The linens started disappearing faster than one a week. Danielle noticed on the 9th night. The press was short 4 when she went to fold, and she hadn't taken 4. She stood there counting them twice, then a third time. Someone else was in the linens. Someone else was watching what came and went from that press. She filed it the way she filed everything, in the part of her mind that had kept her alive, and she said nothing to Doyol, because saying it meant admitting the room in the pantry might not be as blind as they'd bet their lives on. That night in the cedar room, she watched him more than she listened. The bruise on his ribs had gone the yellow-green of a bruise a week old, and there was a new one over it, fresh, and she thought about the linens, and the note, and the 4 short, and she thought, "This ends. Everything in this house ends. The only question is who's holding the knife when it does." But she didn't say it. She'd learned that from him. You don't hand someone a fear until you've got something to do about it. "You're somewhere else," he said. "I'm counting." Counting what? She almost told him. The linens, the press, the sense that had been building for 2 days that the blind spots were getting eyes. But the 11 minutes, and the 3 a.m. cups, and the honest sentences in the steam had bought them something, and she wasn't going to spend it on a hunch. Not yet. Days, she said. "I'm counting days." "How many?" 9. He reached over and took her hand and turned it and pressed his mouth to the wrist again, the pulse point, the one gesture he had that wasn't guarded, and she let the count go quiet in her head and gave him the 9 minutes the shift would allow. But she'd seen the press come up short. And a woman who'd survived by counting does not unsee a number that doesn't add. When she went up the back stairs that night, she stopped on the landing, where the camera's red eye watched the hall, and for the first time in 2 years, she looked straight into it instead of past it. Somewhere in this house, someone was watching the watchers. Someone was counting the same things she counted, and whoever it was had started with the linens, the one thing that moved between the blind rooms, which meant whoever it was already knew there were blind rooms, and already knew that things were moving through them at hours the house was supposed to be asleep. She held the medallion between 2 fingers on the dark landing and made herself a smaller, harder promise than the one she'd made in the steam. 9 days. She would keep the midnights, but she would also keep her eyes open, because the engine that bound her to him ran on a secret, and a secret is only safe until someone else learns to count. Below her, the house ticked and settled. A car she didn't recognize slowed at the service gate, idled, and rolled on without stopping, the first time she'd ever seen one do that. She watched its lights swing across the ceiling and disappear, and she stood very still on the landing until the count in her chest reached 200, and then she went to bed, and she did not sleep. She started keeping the count in ink, not on paper. Paper burns, but paper also gets found. And Danielle had learned in this house that anything you could hold could be used against you. So she kept it on the inside of her own head, the way she kept the map of the cameras, the way she kept the 11 minutes, and the 200 and the 9 days sliding down toward 8. She counted cars now. That was the new thing. On the night Soyeon was gone, and Soyeon was gone a lot, more than any friend's house could explain, the service gate opened when it had no reason to open. She noticed it on the 10th night. She was on the second landing with a cloth in her hand, wiping down the banister she'd already wiped, because wiping gave her a reason to be near the window that looked over the East Drive. The house had gone quiet, the way it went quiet after 11, after the shift change, after the men in the box passed the second gate, traded places, and got sloppy for a quarter hour. And then headlights, 2 of them, low and white, swinging up the service road that nobody used at that hour except delivery trucks that came at dawn. She stopped wiping. She held still and watched. The vehicle rolled to the service gate, and the gate rolled back for it. No buzzer, no voice on the intercom, nothing. A van, dark, square, the kind of van that meant a plumber or a florist or a man come to fix the boiler. Except it was past 11 at night, and there was no plumber alive who came past 11 without being called 3 times first. She looked for the plate. There was no plate. Front bumper, clean metal, a bracket where a plate should bolt, and no plate bolted to it. Her stomach did something small and cold. The van pulled around the east side, out of the window's reach, toward the old service court by the kitchen wing where the deliveries stacked. She waited. She counted. She got to 140 before it pulled back into view, nosed toward the gate, and left. Whatever it had come to do, it had done in under 3 minutes, and it had done it in the one blind stretch of the night, when the men were changing over and nobody watched the court. She wrote it on the inside of her head, van, no plate, 11:40, gone before the shift settled. Duyal came at 3, the way he came, through the garage, his knuckles wrapped in the linen she'd learned to fold thin. She poured 2 cups because she'd heard the tires. She cleaned the split over his eyebrow. She did not tell him about the van. She'd promised him nothing, exactly, but she'd learned to hold a thing until she understood it, and she did not yet understand the van. She only knew that a house that ran on blind spots had just used one of hers. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm always quiet," she said. "It's the job." He looked at her a beat too long. He let it go. The next night, So-yeon was home, and there was no van. The night after, So-yeon left at 8 with the travel bag and the line about the friend, and the van came at 11:35. Same gate, same blind stretch. No plate. And this time, Danielle was already at the window, cloth in hand, counting before the headlights cleared the road. 2 men got out. She couldn't see faces. She saw shapes, dark coats, unhurried, men who knew exactly how long they had. They opened the back of the van. They carried things out and they carried things in, and the things were boxes, flat gray boxes with lids, the kind that came stamped maintenance on the side, because somebody had decided that was a word nobody questioned. Maintenance. In a house with a full staff and a standing crew, maintenance boxes arriving at midnight in an unmarked van. She counted the boxes. 4 out, 3 in. The numbers didn't match, and numbers that didn't match were the first thing they'd taught her in the hotel program, back before the money ran out. A front desk lives and dies on the count, and when the count is off, somebody is moving something they don't want counted. 4 out, 3 in. 1 box, gone missing from the arithmetic. She thought about the linen, 4 pieces short on the 9th day, gone from the press without her hand on it. She thought about the count being off in 2 places now, the linen and the boxes, and she thought that a house has only so many hands, and that maybe it was 1 set of hands, moving things through the blind rooms in the dark. She should have gone to bed. She went down instead. Not to the court. She wasn't a fool. She wasn't going to walk into 2 men in dark coats at midnight, but to the kitchen wing, to the back passage that ran behind the pantry, the one with the window slit that let in the fresh line of light. She moved the way 2 years had taught her to move, on the floorboards that didn't speak, past the camera that only saw the main hall, into the one interior stretch the eye of the house never reached. She waited. She heard the van doors. She heard the gate. She heard the engine fade down the service road and die into the ordinary night. And then she waited longer, because that was the discipline. And when the count in her chest reached 200, she went out into the service court, and the boxes were there. 3 of them, stacked by the delivery door, waiting for the dawn crew to think they were supplies. Gray lids. Maintenance stamped on the side in black. She crouched. She listened to the whole house breathe around her. The pipes, the far hum of the pool filter, the nothing that meant nobody was near. Then she lifted the lid off the top box with 2 fingers, the way she'd lifted every dangerous thing in her life, slow, ready to set it back and be gone. No tools, no wrenches, no filters, no coils of copper, none of the honest weight a maintenance box carries. Paper. The box was full of paper. Folders, banded stacks of them, and account books with the year stamped on the spine, and printed pages dense with columns and figures, and the small cramped signatures at the bottom that meant somebody had signed off on a number. Ledgers, financial documents, the bones of money, boxed and moved at midnight through the one court the cameras couldn't see. Danielle's breath went shallow. Her hand hovered over the top folder. She didn't take it. She wasn't stupid. A folder missing from a box counted at midnight would be noticed by whoever was doing the counting, and she'd already learned there was a counter in this house who wasn't her. But she read. She read the way you read a front desk ledger with a line of angry guests behind you, fast, taking the shape of it and not the words. Account numbers, transfers, 2 columns that should have matched and didn't, the way the boxes didn't, the way the linen didn't, and a name, printed at the top of one page, a company name she'd dusted on 100 envelopes carried up to the study. She set the lid back exactly where it had been. She lined the seam of it the way it had been lined. She rose, and she was 3 steps into the dark passage when the light came on in the kitchen. She froze against the wall. Footsteps, slow, a man's weight. She knew the weight. She'd learned it at 3 a.m. over 2 cups of coffee, and it steadied her and frightened her at once, because if it was him, then he'd find her here, where she had no reason to be, in the passage behind the court, where the boxes sat. Duyol came through the kitchen. He was in the charcoal still, the collar open, back from wherever the knuckles came from. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes went from her face to the door behind her, the door to the court, the door to the boxes, and she watched him understand in one breath everything she'd done. "What are you doing down here?" Not a question. Flat, the warmth gone out of it, the 3 a.m. voice replaced with something she'd only heard him use on other men. "I heard a van," she said. She kept her voice level. "No plate. Twice this week." Something moved behind his eyes and then closed over. "You didn't hear anything. I counted the boxes." She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. The job had trained that out of her years ago. 4 out, 3 in. The maintenance boxes are full of paper, Doyol. Account books. There's a name on the... Stop. One word, hard as a struck door. He crossed the kitchen, and he was close now. Close enough that she could see the muscle jump in his jaw, and everything gentle that had lived between them at 3 a.m. was nowhere in his face. "You didn't see the boxes. You didn't open anything. Say it." She looked at him. She'd knelt on his marble. She'd faced down his wife's heel 2 fingers from her hand and hadn't chipped. She wasn't going to be made small in a dark kitchen by the one man who'd looked at her like a person. "I opened the box," she said. His hand came up and pressed flat over his own mouth, the way a man does when he's swallowing the thing he wants to say. He turned away from her. He put both palms on the counter and leaned into them, and his shoulders were a wall, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone somewhere cold and far. "Go to your room." "Duyol, you don't say my name in this house." He didn't turn around. "You go to your room. You forget the van. You forget the count. In the morning you polish the stairs, and you keep your eyes on the marble, and you don't lift a lid. Not one. Not ever again. Do you understand me?" The words landed on her like a hand on the back of the neck, pushing her down toward the marble, the way So-yeon had pushed her down. She heard it in her body before her head could argue. She heard, "Good girl." She heard, "Gratitude's not in the blood with your kind." She heard every voice that had ever told her to keep her eyes down and be grateful for the keeping, and now it was his voice, the one voice she'd let close, saying the same shape of the same thing. Her face didn't change. She'd learned long ago not to let it change. But something inside her folded shut, like a lid set back on a box. "I understand," she said. "I understand fine." He heard it. She watched his shoulders flinch at the flatness of it, watched him almost turn, and he didn't turn, and that was its own answer. He'd chosen the cold. He'd chosen to make her small to keep her out of it, and he was too far inside the thing to see that from where she stood, there was no difference between a man protecting her and a man ashamed of her. Both of them ended with her told to look at the floor. Danielle. Quieter now, but he still hadn't turned. "You want the stairs perfect by 2, she said. "They'll be perfect by 2. She left him there with his hands on the counter and his back to her, and she went up the servant's stair with her spine straight and her chin level, and the count going in her chest, and she did not let herself feel the thing until the door of the service room was shut behind her. Then she sat on the edge of the narrow bed. She held the medallion at her throat between 2 fingers, the way she held it when the money was low and the world was loud, and she made herself breathe. She did not cry. She never cried. Crying was for people who still expected the world to be fair, and she'd stopped expecting that at 16, over a coffin and 3 months of back rent. She thought it through instead. That was the thing she had that they didn't know she had. They saw the uniform and the count and the good girl, and they thought that was the whole of her. They didn't see the 2 years of the program, the front desk arithmetic, the logistics of moving 300 rooms and 10,000 pieces of laundry through a building without losing a single sheet. She knew how things moved through a house. She knew what a broken count meant. She knew that when the paper hid in the maintenance boxes, and the wife hid at a friend's that wasn't a friend's, and the knuckles came home split at 3 in the morning, the count was off somewhere much bigger than a stack of towels, and somebody in this house was moving something they didn't want counted. And now she knew where the paper slept before the dawn crew moved it. He'd told her to look at the floor. She'd spent her whole life being told to look at the floor. The difference, the only difference that had ever mattered, was whether she did. She lay back on the narrow bed, and she looked at the ceiling, and she listened to the house go still, and somewhere below her a van that wasn't there had left a count that didn't balance, and she began, in the dark, to do the arithmetic. Van at 11:35 on the night So-yeon was gone. Never on the night So-yeon was home. She turned that over. A wife who left so a van could come. A husband who came home bleeding and told the woman he trusted to look at the floor. Boxes of paper that pretended to be tools. A count off by 1 box, by 4 sheets of linen, off in every place she'd thought to look. Somebody was skimming. Somebody was moving the bones of the money through the blind rooms of a house built to see everything, and they'd built their route through exactly the stretches she'd mapped in 2 years of learning, where the eyes weren't, the pantry, the court, the cedar room, the seam of the shift change. Which meant somebody else knew the blind spots too. Somebody who'd been counting linen. Somebody who'd let a strange car slow at the service gate one night and roll on without stopping, testing the dark. She thought about the man in the study, the navy pinstripe, the silver tie, the leather portfolio he carried up past the fresh-washed marble on the days the money moved. She thought about a voice through a study door. "Not while my wife is in the house." And she hadn't understood it then, and she wasn't sure she understood it now. But she was beginning to feel the shape of a thing much larger than a maid and a master, and a locked cedar room. A thing with the wife inside it, and the money man inside it, and the midnight van running paper through the one court nobody watched. She thought, he told me to forget the count. He, of all of them, told me the count didn't happen. She thought, I have never once in my life been able to forget a count. Down the hall, a floorboard she knew by heart gave its small complaint. Not Doyol's weight. Lighter, a woman's tread. Mrs. O moving through the dark on some errand of her own, or maybe only the house settling, maybe only the pipes. Danielle held still and listened until it passed. The house was a mouth, Mrs. O had said. Not a ladder. It ate the things that fed it, and it climbed nowhere, and it never, ever stopped being hungry. Fine. Let it be a mouth. She'd spent 2 years learning its teeth. She closed her eyes, and she set the whole of it down in ink on the inside of her head, where it couldn't burn and couldn't be found. The van, the plate that wasn't there, the 4 out and 3 in, the paper in the maintenance boxes, and the name on the page she'd read too fast to trust. The nights the wife was gone lining up, one for one, with the nights the paper moved, and the man who'd looked at her like a person telling her, in the cold voice he used on other men, to look at the floor and be grateful. She was done being grateful. She'd set it on her knees on his marble, because the rent came due in 8 days, and a body has to eat, and she'd meant not one word of it, and she'd promised herself the day would come when she'd stop saying it. Maybe the day was closer than 8. She didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, and she watched the gray come up slow in the window slit, and when it was time, she rose and dressed in the order she always dressed, the collar and the apron and the dress and the sheer black tights, and she fixed the medallion at the base of her throat where her grandmother had worn it, and she went down to the foyer and she began to polish the stairs. Perfect, by 2. She'd set it and she'd do it. Let them see the maid on her knees with the cloth, eyes down, doing the marble. Let them think that was the whole of her. She worked the count into the rhythm of the cloth, the van, the boxes, the nights, the name, and she polished the great curved staircase of the house that was a mouth until she could see her own face looking back up out of the stone, level and unbroken, and behind her face the red eye of the camera in the ceiling, watching the maid do exactly what she'd been told and seeing nothing at all of what she'd already begun to take. The cars came up the drive at noon, 2 of them, and Danielle heard the wrong sound in the gravel before she saw anything. Soyeon never came home at noon. Soyeon came home at dusk, alone, with the friend line spent and the travel bag empty. But there it was, the low purr of the sedan, and behind it a second engine, higher, sportier, and the horn tapped twice, like a woman announcing herself to a room she owned. Danielle was on the 3rd stair with the cloth in her hand. She did not stand up fast. She finished the pass she'd started, level, and set the cloth on the rail, and by the time the front doors swung in on their own weight, Soyeon was already crossing the marble in the red-soled heels, sunglasses shoved up into the blonde hair, the white clutch under her arm, and beside her a second woman in green, taller, thinner, phone up, already filming the foyer like a listing she meant to buy. There, Soyeon said, not to Danielle, to the woman in green. That's the staircase I told you about. 42 steps. Guess how many times a day it gets done wrong. The woman in green laughed, the way you laugh at a joke you didn't hear. Mrs. O came out of the East Hall, drying her hands, and stopped. 2 of the dark-coated men drifted in from the service court and stood at the edge of the stone, hands folded, faces flat. The dawn crew, the young one, Ji-woo, and the older woman who did the glass, came to the kitchen arch and did not cross it. The house filled up at the edges, the way a room fills before something breaks. Soyeon stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at Danielle like she was reading a price tag. Come down. Danielle came down, 9 steps. She counted them without meaning to. Closer. She came closer. She stopped an arm's length off, hands at her sides, the medallion cool at the base of her throat, and she kept her chin level, because level was the only thing in the house that was hers. Soyeon walked a slow half-circle around her, heels clicking, and spoke to the woman in green the whole time, like Danielle was furniture being appraised. You see the hair? I've told her twice. It looks like a struck match, like something caught fire on her head, and nobody put it out. A soft laugh, and the color's not even hers. Nothing on her is hers. The waist, all of it, padding and paint, and that little chain she thinks nobody notices. The woman in green tilted the phone. Is she new? 2 years. 2 years and she still can't leave the marble without a streak. Soyeon reached out and lifted a strand of the copper hair off Danielle's shoulder, held it up to the light, let it drop. I keep her because it's hard to find girls who'll do the floors on their knees anymore. They all think they're too good now. Her kind especially. You give them a uniform and they think it's a costume. Danielle's jaw set. She held it. Say good afternoon to my friend, Soyeon said. Good afternoon, Danielle said. Not to me, to her. Soyeon's smile thinned. And look down when you do it. You people never learned that. Eyes on the floor. The word landed and split. You people. The same shape as the line on the marble weeks ago. Gratitude's not in the blood with your kind. And Danielle felt the whole of it come back up through her. Not new, multiplied, every swallowed morning stacked behind her teeth. She looked at the floor. Not because she was told, because if she looked up, she would say the thing that ended the 19 days, and the 8 that were left of them, and the money that wasn't in the account, and she needed the money more than she needed the second of pride. There, Soyeon said, satisfied. See? She can learn. The woman in green filmed it. Soyeon turned the clutch over in her hands and got to the part she'd come home at noon to do. I'm letting her go this week, she announced, to the men, to Mrs. O, to the arch full of staff, to the whole listening house. I want that clear so nobody acts surprised. She's not what this house should look like. When people come up that drive, this, she flicked 2 fingers at Danielle, head to flats, is the first thing they see. A girl off a corner in a uniform 2 sizes wrong. I've carried it 2 years for the master's sake. I'm done carrying it. Ma'am, Mrs. O started, quiet. Did I ask you? Soyeon didn't turn her head. You're next if you open your mouth. Mrs. O closed it. Danielle kept her eyes on the floor and did the arithmetic she always did. Cold, fast, front desk arithmetic. 8 days of rent, $411, no family, the medallion, and under the arithmetic, lower, something she didn't let onto her face. He told me to look at the floor too. 3 nights ago, in the kitchen. Go to your room, keep your eyes on the marble. And she'd read it as shame then, the same as this, and she'd carried that reading up the servant's stair and held it against him. Now the wife was saying the words out loud with a phone pointed at her, and they sounded exactly the same coming out of both mouths, and that was the worst thing in the room, that she could no longer tell the man who was protecting her from the woman who was disposing of her, because from the marble, on her knees, they used the same words. Kneel, Soyeon said. Danielle didn't move. You heard me. You did it before. You said you were grateful for the work. Say it again, so my friend can hear how it's done. Soyeon stepped in, close enough that the perfume was a wall. Kneel, and say it, and mean it, and maybe I let you finish the week for the reference. Don't, and you walk today with nothing. Your choice, sweetheart. You like choices. Choose. The clutch, the phone, the men at the edge of the stone. Ji-woo in the arch with her hand over her mouth. 8 days. Danielle looked at the marble. She had polished this exact square of it that morning until her own face came up out of it. She could see the top of her own head in it now, the copper, and the pale ring of the pearls. She started to bend her knees. That's enough. The voice came from above them, off the upper corridor, flat and low, and carrying the way his voice carried when the studio door was about to seal, and every head in the foyer turned up at once. Shin Do-yul stood at the top of the 42 steps with one hand on the rail. He was in the charcoal, collar open, and he came down slow, one step at a time, and the sound of the Oxfords on the marble was the only sound in the house. So-yeon's mouth was already opening, some soft, wifely thing, a welcome, a redirection, and he walked straight past the shape of it without looking at her, all the way down, past Danielle, and turned at the bottom, so he stood between the two women, with his back half to his wife. "Get up," he said to Danielle, quiet. "You don't kneel in this house again. Not for her, not for her, not for her." Danielle straightened. Then he turned to So-yeon, and the temperature of the room dropped. "Darling," So-yeon said, fast, bright, "I didn't know you were home. You were only what?" Not a question. He said it the way he said things across the studio table, to men who owed him. Say the rest of it. "My friend's house. 2 nights this week. Tell them whose house." So-yeon's face did something small and quick at the eyes. "Do-yul. Tell them how you leave at 8 with the bag and come back with it packed exactly the same. Tell them nobody unpacks a bag they actually opened." He took a step. "Tell them what comes up the East Road at 11:40 on the nights you're gone, since you know the schedule so well, since you built it." The woman in green had stopped filming. The phone hung at her side. "I don't know what you want her gone." He tipped his head an inch toward Danielle without breaking the look he had on his wife. "You've wanted her gone since the day she stopped flinching. And you came home at noon, with an audience, with a camera, to do it loud, so it would be on record, so there'd be a nice clean clip of the master's household throwing out the help. Who asked you for a clip, So-yeon? Who's the clip for?" Silence. The men at the edge of the stone had gone very still. "I heard all of it," Do-yul said, from the corridor. "Every word, the hair, the corner. You people, kneel." His voice never rose, and that was what made it terrible. "You did that in my house, in front of my staff, and you filmed it, and you called it me being carried for 2 years. He breathed once, careful, the rib. "You have never carried anything in your life that wasn't handed to you to hold for someone else. You're humiliating me," So-yeon hissed, low, the brightness gone. "In front of—" "No." He almost smiled, and there was nothing in it. "I'm correcting the record. You're the one who wanted it on the record." He turned to Danielle then, fully, and the whole room turned with him, and Danielle understood one beat before he spoke what he was about to spend, and she felt her own pulse in the medallion. "Her name is Danielle Monroe," he said, to the foyer, to the men, to Mrs. O, to the arch full of staff, to the phone in the woman's dead hand. "She's the only honest thing that's walked across this floor in 10 years. And every night my wife is at her friend's house that isn't her friend's house. This woman is why I come home, instead of not coming home." So-yeon made a sound. "Say it plainer?" He kept his eyes on Danielle and his voice went quieter, only for the room because the room was already inside it. "Fine, I'm in love with her, have been. I told myself I wouldn't touch it, because she works for me, and a woman who works for you can't say no and mean it. So I didn't. She did." The corner of his mouth moved. "She came down the stairs, I couldn't. That's the whole story. Everyone in this house has been waiting to say it out loud for weeks and been too afraid. I'm not afraid. Fire her, So-yeon. You don't have the standing to fire the girl who does the glass." "You," So-yeon said, and her voice cracked on the single word, and whatever came after it didn't come. "Get your friend, get your car, and get off my drive." He said it without heat now. Done, spent, final. We're a long way past the part where you leave with anything. Go. And then, before the wife could answer, before the men could shift their weight, before Mrs. O could breathe, he closed the last of the distance to Danielle, and he took her face in one hand, the split knuckles cool against her jaw, and he kissed her. In the foyer, on the marble she'd polished at dawn, under the red eye of the camera in the ceiling that had never once, in 2 years, seen a single true thing happen in this house until now. Danielle heard the clutch hit the floor. She heard the woman in green say, "Oh my God," under her breath. She heard one of the men exhale. She heard Jiwoo, in the arch, make a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, quickly swallowed. She heard the whole architecture of the secret, the midnight, the 11 minutes, the count to 200, the cedar room, just this, come apart in one motion in the middle of the day with the doors wide open. His hand didn't shake. Hers came up and closed on his wrist, over the watch, and held. When he pulled back an inch, his forehead came down to hers for a second, and he said it so low only she got it. No more looking at the floor, and she understood. Finally, all of it, the kitchen, 3 nights ago, go to your room, keep your eyes on the marble, not shame. A man trying to keep her clean, and finding out the only word he had for it was the same word his wife used to grind her down. He'd known how it sounded. He'd said it anyway, to keep her out of the boxes, and she'd walked away hating him for it. "You told me to look at the floor too," she said, "just for him." "I know." His thumb moved once on her jaw. "I'll never do it again either." Behind them, Soyeon had gone the color of the marble. She stood in the middle of her own foyer with her clutch on the floor and her friend's phone dark and dead at the friend's side, and for 1 second, Danielle saw it, over Doyol's shoulder. For 1 second, the wife's face wasn't hurt. It wasn't a woman whose husband had just kissed the help in front of the world. It was something colder and quicker, something that flicked to the camera in the ceiling and back, something that was already counting, already calculating, already reaching for a phone of its own. Then the hurt came down over it like a mask arriving late to its own scene, and Soyeon bent, and picked up the clutch, and straightened, and did not cry either. "You'll regret every second of that," she said. "Steady now, too steady. You have no idea what you just did." "Get off my drive," Doyol said, and turned his back on her, which was the worst thing he could have done to her, and he knew it. Soyeon looked at Danielle over his shoulder. One long, flat, blonde look, top to flats, the same appraising drag she'd started the whole scene with. Except now there was something behind it that hadn't been there at noon. Not anger. A note taken. A door filed away for later. "Enjoy the house," she said, "while it's his." The heels turned. The woman in green scrambled after her, clutching the dead phone, glancing back once at the two of them by the stairs, like she'd stumbled into something she'd be telling for years. The doors swung, the engines caught, the sport one first, then the sedan, and the gravel spat, and the gate rolled, and then the drive was empty and the foyer was full of staff who had all just watched the household turn over in 90 seconds flat. Nobody moved. Then Mrs. O crossed the marble, slow, and stopped in front of the two of them, and looked at Doyol, and looked at Danielle, and for the first time in 2 years, the flat governess face broke into something Danielle had never seen on it. Not a smile. Close. "The glass can wait," Mrs. O said, to the arch, to Jiwoo, to all of them. "Go on, all of you. Nothing happened here you need to talk about outside these walls. A beat. Anyone who does won't have walls to talk inside of by Friday." They went. Slow, looking back, but they went. Doyol still had Danielle's face in his hand. He let it go now, careful, like setting something down he wasn't sure he was allowed to have picked up. "That's it," he said. quiet, almost to himself. There's no unsaying that. It's in every phone that was in this room. It's in the wife's hands by tonight. He looked up at the camera in the ceiling, the red dot, steady, watching, recording. It's in worse hands than that. Danielle followed his eyes up to the lens, and it was there, standing in the wreckage of the best thing that had ever happened to her in this house, that the cold part of her, the front desk part, the part that counted vans and linen and boxes at midnight, woke all the way up and understood something the warm part hadn't caught yet. He'd said it in front of the camera, on purpose, in front of the one eye in the house that never blinked and never forgot and belonged, wire by wire, to whoever sat at the other end of it. And somebody was always at the other end of it. "Duyol," she said, slow. "Who watches the cameras?" He looked down from the lens to her face, and whatever he saw there, the arithmetic already running behind her eyes, made his jaw tighten, because he'd asked himself the same question in the same second, and he already didn't like the answer. "Not me," he said. Up in the ceiling, unblinking, the red eye kept recording, and 40 miles across the city, a screen in a room neither of them had ever seen lit up with the whole of it. The kneel, the correction, the name said out loud, the kiss, and a hand in rimless glasses reached out, calm, unhurried, and pressed record on a copy of its own. The screen, 40 miles away, froze on the kiss, and a finger tapped the corner of it twice, dragging a red bracket around Danielle's face like a target. Guak Seonu leaned back in the leather chair, portfolio flat on the desk, and watched the frame loop. Kneel, rise, name, kiss. He let it run 4 times, then he lifted a phone, dialed a number he'd dialed for 30 years, and waited. Duyol answered on the second ring. "You made it easy," Guak said. "No greeting. Do you know how long I waited for you to do something this stupid?" Duyol stood in the study with the door shut, the foyer still humming behind it, Danielle 2 rooms away. He said nothing. "The board meets Thursday," Guak went on. "There's a clause in your marriage contract, Duyol. Article 9, Moral Conduct Clause. Your grandfather wrote it to protect the family name, cheat on the wife the family chose, and control of the holding company reverts to the trust, and the trust answers to the board, and the board," a pause, almost warm, "answers to me now. Soyeon put you up to this," Duyol said. "Soyeon thinks she put me up to this." A soft sound, not quite a laugh. "Walk it back. Fire the maid tonight, on paper, for theft. Deny the girl. Say she seduced you for money. I have the video. I'll cut it so a child could read it. You keep your seat, you keep breathing. That's the offer." Duyol looked at the koi in the mirror across the room, the tail of it vanishing under his collar. "And if I don't?" "Then Thursday the board sees a married man ruined by his cleaner, and everything your grandfather built goes to the trust, and you go somewhere with no walls and no door." Guak's voice didn't rise. "Fire her tonight, Duyol. Sentiment is a luxury men like us can't afford. You taught me that." The line went dead. Duyol set the phone down. His knuckles, the split ones, pressed white against the desk. He'd known for 2 nights the man was rotten. He hadn't known how deep the rot went, or that it went straight through his own marriage. Danielle was in the linen room when he found her, folding by feel, the medallion warm against her collar. He told her the offer flat, every word, the way you set down a knife so no one gets cut. He didn't soften Article 9. He didn't tell her it would be fine. She listened. She finished the fold. Her hands didn't shake, and that was its own kind of answer. "He said I seduced you for money," she said. "He'll edit it so it looks that way." "Then let him edit." She set the folded cloth on the stack, squared the corner, "and I'll find the frame he cut." Duyol looked at her. "Danielle, You told me once to stay clean, not to know. She turned. That was for when knowing couldn't help. Knowing helps now. So, I'm going to know everything. She started that night, and she started with the things she was trained to do. Not fight, count. 2 years of front desk logistics, of reconciling a 200-room ledger against a delivery dock, of proving a shipment lied by the timestamps it couldn't fake. A hotel taught her that people forge signatures and forget clocks. She had a map already, built in ink on the inside of her head. The van, no plate, 11:40. Only on the nights Soyeon was gone. 4 boxes out, 3 in. Linen 4 pieces short on the 9th day. The car that slowed at the service gate. She laid them end to end on the back of a laundry slip, times down the left, and looked for the shape of a lie. The shape was there. Every night the van came, Soyeon had left at 8 for the friend's house. Every night. 11 separate nights across 2 months, and on all 11 the wife was elsewhere, and the van rolled up the blind road at the exact minute the guards changed. No van the nights she stayed home. Not one. She's not leaving, so you can't see her, Danielle said the next dawn, over 2 cups at the staff table. She's leaving so the van can come. She built the schedule. She is the schedule. Duel's cup stopped halfway. The friend's house is guac, she said. It has to be. The nights she's gone are the nights the paper moves. She goes to him, and the boxes come here. She turned the slip so he could read it. Your wife's alibi is his delivery window. He read it twice. His jaw worked. 30 years of a man's face, and the map of a maid's counting had just turned it inside out in front of him. There's more, she said. The boxes are ledgers. Account books stamped with the year. 2 columns that should match and don't. I only had 30 seconds, but I read a name. The same one I dusted off 100 envelopes carried up to your study. Somebody's moving money out of the company through those books, and signing your name to do it. Prove the signature, he said. Quiet. Not doubt. A test. The kind his father used to set. Get me the originals, and get me the camera feed, the real one, before he cuts it. He studied her a long moment. The man had spent 30 years reading faces for the lie in them, and he found none in hers. He's had 30 years to build this, Doyol said. You've had 4 days. He built it to fool men who trust each other. She squared the last slip against the table edge. I don't trust anybody in this house except you, and I've been counting since the first week. 4 days is how long it took me to write it down. I've had 2 months to see it. Something moved behind his eyes that wasn't quite hope. He'd stopped telling her to look at the floor. Now he was learning to look up at her instead. The feed was the hard part, and the feed was the whole game. Every camera in the house wrote to a server in the security box beyond the second gate, the box the guards sat in, the box Guac's men had wired the year they upgraded the system. Doyol still owned the house. He still owned the men, or half of them. At 2 in the morning he walked out past the fountain, past the koi pond dark under its film of leaves, and told the senior guard he wanted the raw drives pulled and copied before anyone touched them. The guard looked at the split knuckles, at the face that had never once asked twice, and pulled the drives. Danielle sat with the copy until the sky went gray. Front desk logistics, again. You don't watch the footage, you watch the timestamps and the gaps. She scrubbed the 11 nights. On 10 of them the feed ran clean. On the 11th, the night 3 weeks back, there was a splice, 90 seconds missing from the foyer camera, papered over with a still frame held too long, the timestamp jumping 11:38 to 11:41, with no motion between. She pulled the audio from the service court mic instead, the one no one thought to cut because no one remembered it was there, installed for a delivery dispute 2 winters ago, and there, in the missing 90 seconds, was a door, and footsteps, and a voice she knew, rimless glasses calm, saying a name into the dark. Not Soyeon's name. Is the wife clear of the house? And Soyeon's voice, close, unhurried. She left an hour ago. We have until 1. Kwok had walked into the mansion the night Soyeon was supposedly at her friend's. Soyeon had let him in. The alibi ate itself. Danielle sat very still, then she copied the 90 seconds 3 times, onto 3 drives, and put one behind the loose baseboard in the linen room, one in the inside zip pocket of her bag, and one in Do-yeol's hand. He didn't just skim, she said. He filmed you to trap you, and he trusted your wife to hold the door, and your wife trusted him to make her rich when you fell. She closed his fingers over the drive. They're both standing on the same rope. All we do is show the board who tied it. Do-yeol turned the drive over once, feeling its weight. And you know what he does to people who cross him. I know what he tried to do to you. She didn't raise her voice. For 30 years you called him a friend, and he was measuring you for the floor. That's not a man I'm afraid of. That's a man who got careless, because nobody in this house was supposed to be able to read. She touched the medallion at her throat, once, the way she did when the numbers lined up. I can read. He looked at her for a long beat, and then he did something she'd never seen him do in 2 years. He laughed, short and rough, the sound of a man who'd forgotten the shape of it. My grandfather would have hired you on the spot, he said, and fired everyone else. The board met Thursday, in the mansion, because Gwak wanted it there, wanted the room where the kiss had happened, wanted the marble under their feet when he broke the master of the house. 7 of them around the long table in the east salon, gray men and 1 gray woman, the trust's lawyers standing at the wall. Soyeon sat at the far end in ivory, ankles crossed, sunglasses pushed up into the blonde. Gwak set the portfolio on the table and did not sit. He played the video first. The edit was clean, cruel, exactly what he'd promised. Danielle kneeling, Danielle rising, the master's hand on a servant's jaw, the name, the kiss, and over it a single sentence, typed white on black. Article 9. Moral Conduct. Forfeiture. He let the room breathe it in. Soyeon dabbed a dry eye with a knuckle. A married man, Gwak said, seduced under his own roof, by a woman he pays to scrub his floor. The clause is not ambiguous. Control reverts to the trust. He turned one palm up. Reasonable. I move that we act today. Do-yeol stood. He didn't reach for a folder. He looked down the table at the 7 and said, plainly, I love her. I said it out loud and I'll say it here. That part of his film is true. A stir. Everything around it is a forgery. He nodded once toward the door. Danielle came in. Not in the maid's black. Do-yeol had told her to wear whatever she owned, and what she owned was 1 good gray dress from the hotel program she never finished, and the pearls, and the medallion. She carried a slim folder and a laptop. She set them on the table like she was checking in a guest. My name is Danielle Monroe, she said. I kept his stairs for 2 years. I also spent 2 years learning to prove when a ledger lies. She opened the laptop. Mr. Gwak's video is missing 90 seconds. I found them. She played the service court audio into the still room. A door. Footsteps. Is the wife clear of the house? Why? She left an hour ago. We have until 1. Soyeon's ankles uncrossed. That's the night 3 weeks ago Mrs. Shin told this household she was at a friend's, Danielle said, and laid the laundry slip flat, times down the left. 11 nights of it. She was never at a friend's. On every night the van came with no plate, she left so it could. She built the schedule. Here it is beside the delivery log. She turned a second page. The boxes weren't tools, they were the company's own account books, carried out at midnight through the one room the cameras miss. Two columns that should match. They don't. Short by the same figure every month for 11 months. She set down the third page. Signatures. A real one, blown up from a contract. A forged one, blown up from a ledger. That's Mr. Shin's hand, and that's someone imitating it. The loop of the S is wrong. He never lifts the pen there. Whoever signed these away signed them to a shell. The name I dusted off 100 envelopes that went up to this study, addressed to a company Mr. Guac controls. She closed the folder. He didn't film a husband cheating. He filmed a distraction. While you all watched the kiss, he was walking the money out the back. The gray woman at the middle of the table reached over and slid the signature page toward herself, studied it, looked up at Guac over her glasses. Guac's face stayed neutral, the mole under his eye, the rimless calm. But his hand had gone to the portfolio and stopped there, flat, as if holding it shut could hold the room. For a moment, nobody at the table spoke. The audio hung in the salon like smoke that wouldn't clear. So-yeon had gone the color of her own ivory suit. "She's a maid," Guac said. "She'll say anything he tells her to." "Then don't believe the maid," Duyol said. "Believe the audio. Believe your own splice." He set the raw drive on the table. 90 seconds you cut, Seonu. You're on them, walking into my house on a night my wife swore she was gone. You trusted her to hold the door. Tell them what you were going to do to her share, once the trust was yours. So-yeon's head turned. For the first time she looked at Guac, the way Danielle had once looked at a mismatched shipment, seeing the lie land, and seeing who it landed on. "What share?" So-yeon said, low. "What do you mean, my share?" Guac didn't answer her. That was the answer. She stood so fast the chair scraped. "You told me half. You told me half, and then the boy." The mask cracked all the way through. "You were never going to give me anything." "Sit down, So-yeon," Guac said, quiet, and the quiet gave him away worse than shouting. The board had already turned. The gray woman was murmuring to the lawyer at the wall. Two of the men were on their phones. The trust's counsel picked up the drive, the folder, the laundry slip, and squared them into a stack with the reflex of a man building an exhibit. It came apart fast after that, the way a rope does once one strand goes. The forged signatures were the crime the board could hold. Theft, not adultery, and theft they were required to hand to more than a boardroom. Guac was walked out between his own two dark-coated men, who were not his men anymore by the time they reached the drive, to a car that belonged to the authorities. The trust called before the meeting ended. So-yeon lost the thing she'd built the whole scheme to keep: the access, the name, the standing to sign or spend or speak for the house. Her keys, her cards, the quilted white bag pulled from the wall safe by the lawyer. She left without red under her heels, because there was nothing left to walk on. Doyol kept the part of the conglomerate the fraud hadn't poisoned. Smaller, cleaner. His, in a way it had never been while Article 9 hung over it. The clause died with the marriage the board dissolved. He signed the last of it standing up, at the long table, and set the pen down without lifting it wrong once. The salon emptied by evening. Mrs. O moved through it turning off lamps, and paused by Danielle at the door, and said only, "You got what you needed." It wasn't the whole of the old line. She left the rest. Then go. Unsaid, because the going wasn't hers to script anymore. Danielle didn't go, but she didn't stay the old way either. Duyol came to her with a contract, not a plea, and that was the only reason she read it. A real position, house operations, front of house, the work she'd trained 2 years for and never gotten to finish. A wage that covered the $650 and left the $400 in her account, looking like the beginning of something instead of the end. And a clause of her own, written in, that she'd dictated and he'd signed without argument, that the day he ever hid her again, ever asked her to look at the floor for anyone, she could walk out the front gate and owe him nothing, and the door would be hers to open. She read every line the way she read a shipment manifest, finger down the margin, nothing skipped. When she reached the wage, her finger stopped and stayed. $650 covered. The $400, for the first time, was hers to keep instead of spend down to nothing. She'd carried that number in her chest for 2 years, like a held breath. She let it out slow. "You could have just asked me to stay," he said, watching her read it. "You'd have asked me to stay anyway." She turned the page, found her clause, read it twice the way she read everything twice. Not, "This is so I stay because I want to, not because I've got nowhere to fall." She looked up. "You said, once the days ran out, I'd go if I wanted, especially then." "I remember. The days ran out today." She picked up the pen. "I'm choosing the next ones." She signed it. The loop of her S was even, unhurried, entirely her own. Near midnight the house was dark and quiet, and, for the first time in 2 years, unwatched. The drives pulled, the box beyond the gate empty, the red eyes in the halls gone dead the hour the trust cut the feed. No wife left at 8 for a house that wasn't a friend's. No van at 11:40. No count to keep. Danielle walked down to the cedar room in a single white towel, hair loose in copper waves, the medallion at her throat. She fed water to the stones and sat on the low bench in the rising steam, not to occupy space this time, just to be in it. He came in behind her, towel at the waist, the koi bare on his neck, the knuckles healed to pale seams. He didn't check the doors. There was no one to check for. He sat beside her and put his healed hand over her hand, and she didn't have to press the wound to make it stay. "No cameras," she said. "No cameras, no wife, no clock." He turned her hand over in his. "Just this." She'd said those 2 words back to him in this room the first night, as a lock. She said them again now, and they weren't a lock anymore. They were a door standing open, and both of them already through it. "Just this," Danielle said. The steam climbed the cedar. Outside, the marble stairs she'd knelt on stood empty in the dark. 42 steps that no one would count against her again. And in the one room no lens had ever seen, a woman who'd walked in with $400 and a grandmother's medallion sat where she'd chosen to sit, beside the man who'd learned to stop hiding her, and for once, the house held nothing back and took nothing away. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Tell me, K-Fam, have you ever poured your whole heart into someone who was allowed to love you only in the dark, behind closed doors, and when they finally tried to hide you again, did you have the courage Danielle had to walk away on your own terms? Mark my words, K-Fam, dignity you refuse to trade for comfort is the one thing nobody can fire you from. Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, truth, and desire, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.